They say love makes you softer. But the truth is, real love makes you stronger. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't chase, doesn't explain. It simply stands. When toxic people can't control you anymore, they call you distant, cold, even cruel. But what they are really saying is, your peace no longer serves my CHAOs. That's not arrogance, it's awakening. It's the quiet revolution that begins the moment you stop being available for your own pain. It often begins so quietly that you barely notice it. A small suggestion disguised as concern. A sigh loaded with guilt. A pause long enough to make you wonder if you did something wrong. That's how control creeps in. It's not loud, it's almost polite. In the language of Jungian psychology, this is how the unconscious mind operates. It doesn't invade, it seduces. A toxic person doesn't steal your power directly. They convince you to hand it over in the name of peace, love, or being the bigger person. It's emotional sleight of hand, subtle enough to pass as care. Carl Jung once said that what we most need will appear to us in the form of a challenge. Toxic people are often those challenges, mirrors walking around in human form. They reflect the parts of ourselves we still haven't mastered, our fear of conflict, our need for approval, our hidden guilt. They are the living archetypes of control and dependency. The more we avoid confrontation, the more they sense that avoidance and move in closer. It's not always intentional. Some do it unconsciously, repeating old family patterns stored deep within the collective unconscious. They don't realize they are projecting their repressed self, using you as a stage for their unhealed pain. Here's the strange part. Control can look like love. I just want what's best for you, they'll say, while clipping your wings. You'll hear, you've changed, when you start setting boundaries. That's the shadow in relationships, the unconscious contract where one person agrees to stay small so the other can feel safe. The human psyche often confuses comfort with connection, but they are not the same. Comfort soothes, connection liberates. And liberation always threatens the one who thrives on control. Think of it like dream interpretation. Your life constantly sends you symbols to decode. That friend who never lets you finish a sentence might symbolize your inner fear of not being heard. That coworker who steals credit for your ideas might mirror your own difficulty owning your brilliance. In depth psychology, every encounter is a mirror of the unconscious. When you interpret these dream characters consciously, you stop fighting people and start working with your shadow. This is where inner transformation truly begins. The wounded healer inside you, the part that believes love can fix anyone, will resist this realization. You'll rationalize the manipulation as compassion. They just need understanding. Maybe they are going through something. And yes, empathy is a sacred gift, but without boundaries it becomes a leash. Emotional awareness means recognizing when your care has turned into compliance. That's the moment you begin your own individuation process, separating who you are from what others expect you to be. When you start setting limits, toxic people often shift tactics. They'll move from guilt to flattery, from silence to rage, anything to restore the old dynamic. That's because your awakening disrupts their unconscious survival system. In the alchemy of the soul, this is fire meeting shadow. The moment you stop reacting, you dissolve their spell. It's not about confrontation, it's about clarity. The power of the mind lies not in shouting no, but in silently meaning it. Remember this, manipulation feeds on confusion. The more self-aware you become, the less they can twist your perception. Journaling helps, as does meditation or even analyzing your own dreams through Jungian symbols. Notice recurring images, doors, cages, light and darkness, because they are the language of your psyche revealing how control plays out within you. That's emotional alchemy in action, turning unconscious patterns into conscious power. And as you awaken, something profound happens. you begin to see the pattern everywhere. Not just in others, but in yourself. How often have you controlled through kindness, withheld truth to be liked, or shaped yourself to avoid rejection? Awareness humbles you, but it also frees you. Because the moment you see how control works, you also see why you've been chosen for it. It's not weakness, it's sensitivity. Empaths, healers, and introspective souls become targets because they radiate understanding. And where there is light, there is always shadow waiting to be integrated. That realization opens the next door. The paradox that those most in tune with human consciousness are often the ones who attract the unconscious. They are mirrors for others' darkness. But there's a way to live in that balance without being drained by it. The next step in this inner journey is learning why empaths and self-aware minds become magnets for those who cannot yet face their own shadow. There's something magnetic about people who radiate calm. You can feel it when an empath walks into the room. There's a sense of safety, softness, and quiet understanding. But that same aura that brings comfort can also attract chaos. Carl Jung called this the paradox of light and darkness. The brighter the consciousness, the deeper the shadow it reveals. In the field of depth psychology, that means those who cultivate self-awareness also illuminate what others try to hide. And not everyone can stand in front of that mirror. Toxic people, driven by their repressed selves and unexamined wounds, are subconsciously drawn to that light, not to honor it, but to control it. Empaths often live from the heart. They sense moods before words. They read silence like a language. But this sensitivity, which in Jungian terms is part of the wounded healer archetype, can turn into emotional bondage when compassion is mistaken for responsibility. An empath feels someone's pain and believes it's their job to heal it. This is where the shadow in relationships takes root, the blurred boundary between caring and rescuing. In the collective unconscious, this dynamic has played out for centuries. The healer and the broken, the savior and the victim, light and darkness locked in dance. But true healing, Jung would argue, begins when you stop saving others from their own unconscious mind. There's also a neurological explanation for this magnetic pull. When someone practices self-reflection, when they've done shadow work and learned the art of emotional alchemy, they emit a psychological frequency of stability. The human psyche senses that and clings to it instinctively, like a drowning person reaching for a lifeboat. Toxic personalities, especially narcissistic ones, seek that grounding because they lack it within themselves. Jung and modern psychology both agree. The mind abhors a vacuum. Where self-knowledge is absent, projection rushes in. The narcissist projects strength while craving validation. The empath projects compassion while craving peace. Together, they unconsciously recreate the oldest drama in the world, the one between power and surrender. Many self-aware individuals ask, why do I keep attracting the same kind of person? It's not punishment, it's pattern recognition. The unconscious mind keeps bringing forward what remains unresolved. If your inner child learned that love equals sacrifice, you'll meet that lesson again and again until awareness breaks the loop. Jung called this synchronicity explained, the universe arranging external events to mirror internal truths. It's not coincidence, it's conversation. The way out is not through blame, but through conscious participation in your own evolution. This is the heart of the individuation process, owning both your light and your shadow so no one else can weaponize them against you. Empaths can protect themselves by transforming sensitivity into strength. That means learning the difference between compassion and enablement, between listening and absorbing. Small practices help: journaling emotional triggers, spending time in solitude, setting clear verbal boundaries like, I understand you're upset, but I can't be your emotional anchor right now. Even dream interpretation can guide the way. When an empath repeatedly dreams of drowning or being chased, it's often the unconscious pleading for boundaries. Healing through awareness is an act of spiritual awakening. It's inner alchemy turning emotional overload into wisdom. Once an empath starts to see their worth as sacred, not negotiable, the dynamic shifts. They no longer serve as the emotional supply for someone else's unhealed wounds. Toxic people lose access not because the empath becomes cold, but because they become clear. In that clarity, the empath evolves from rescuer to observer, from being consumed by chaos to understanding it. There's a moment, sometimes small, almost invisible, when everything shifts. It happens when a person finally sees the pattern not as fate, but as repetition. Jung called this the birth of consciousness, the instant when the unconscious mind reveals its own design. One day, you hear the same manipulation you've heard 100 times before, but it lands differently. The guilt doesn't bite. The confusion doesn't stick. Something inside you pauses and whispers, "Not this time." That's the crack in the illusion, the first sign that your awareness has outgrown the game. From that point, toxic people no longer meet the same version of you they once controlled. They meet your boundaries. This turning point isn't about rebellion, it's about recognition. It's the moment when projection and perception separate, and you realize that what they say about you is really about them. The human psyche, once it becomes aware of this, starts reclaiming energy that was trapped in guilt and explanation. That's emotional alchemy, the art of turning reaction into reflection. You stop chasing validation, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that validation from someone unconscious is just another form of control. This realization is the cornerstone of individuation, the process Jung described as becoming who you truly are, not who the world expects you to be. But awareness doesn't come gently. It often arrives through suffering. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Awareness exposes the shadow, the repressed self that tolerated manipulation out of fear of rejection. It reveals the persona you built to be loved, the masks you wore to stay safe. Shadow work means looking at those masks without shame, recognizing that they once served a purpose. You needed them. But now, they suffocate you. Healing the inner child means teaching it that love doesn't require performance. The moment you see that, the chain around your worth begins to break. It's helpful to ground this awareness in action. For example, imagine a person who constantly explains themselves in conversations with a critical partner. One day, they simply stop explaining. Not out of anger, but peace. They respond with, "I hear your perspective," and walk away. That silence is not weakness, it's sovereignty. It's the power of the mind redirecting energy inward, toward healing. In Jungian dream symbols, this would be like walking out of a burning house and realizing you were the one holding the match. The flames were never theirs. They were yours, burning to light your way out. This shift often confuses toxic people. They sense the difference immediately because control relies on reaction. When you no longer react, you break the unconscious contract that fed the dynamic. You step into what Jung called the self, the integrated center of the psyche that holds both light and darkness in balance. You start recognizing synchronicities, sudden opportunities, dreams that feel like messages, coincidences that affirm your growth. That's the collective unconscious responding to your new vibration, aligning with your inner transformation. It's both exhilarating and lonely, because when awareness expands, your circle often shrinks. You may feel grief for the people who can no longer meet you where you've arrived. But that grief is sacred. It's the compost of the old self, nourishing the new one. In this stillness, you begin to understand that freedom isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the peace of no longer explaining your light to those committed to their darkness. And in that silence, a new phase begins, the reclaiming of emotional sovereignty, where you learn not just to see your power, but to live from it. Reclaiming your emotional sovereignty is not about building walls. It's about remembering that your energy is sacred. When someone reclaims their inner authority, they are not becoming hard, they are becoming clear. Jungian psychology teaches that clarity is what dissolves control, not confrontation. The unconscious mind thrives on chaos because chaos keeps it hidden. But once you start bringing light into your emotional patterns, you reclaim every piece of yourself you once outsourced for approval. It's the moment you stop asking, "How do they feel about me?" and start asking, "How do I feel in their presence?" That's self-awareness transforming into guidance. In the individuation process, this reclamation marks the return of the self, the integrated center that Jung believed was the compass of human consciousness. You begin to see your emotions as allies instead of enemies. Anger isn't bad, it's a messenger of boundaries. Sadness isn't weakness, it's the shadow asking to be seen. The meaning of life, Jung once implied, is not in avoiding pain but in finding wisdom within it. This is inner alchemy, the art of transforming emotion into understanding. When practiced daily, it looks like catching yourself before explaining your worth, pausing before overgiving, or simply breathing when someone tries to trigger old wounds. Each pause is a declaration, I am no longer available for my own suffering. This shift also redefines love. Many people mistake attachment for devotion or sacrifice for connection. But emotional sovereignty means loving without losing yourself. Think of it as learning to dance without stepping on your own feet. You give without depletion. You listen without absorption. It's the psychology of balance. A healthy empath doesn't absorb energy. They reflect it back with awareness. This is how the wounded healer archetype becomes whole. Through integration, not isolation. The more conscious you are, the less you need to defend your boundaries. They simply exist, like gravity. In everyday life, reclaiming emotional sovereignty means practicing choice. You choose when to engage and when to walk away. You choose which battles deserve your energy. You even choose your thoughts. Jung's work on projection reminds us that much of what irritates us in others is simply our own shadow wearing a different face. So the real question becomes, is this about them, or about something I haven't healed? That question is emotional freedom disguised as curiosity. It shifts the focus inward without self-blame, turning conflict into opportunity. The human psyche becomes lighter every time it chooses awareness over reaction. One of the most powerful ways to strengthen this sovereignty is through ritual. Not grand, mystical rituals, but quiet, consistent ones. Writing down what emotions visit you each morning. Spending 10 minutes in silence before the world demands your attention. Observing your dreams for symbols that repeat. A locked door, a rising sun, a bird flying free. These images are messages from the unconscious mind guiding your individuation process. They remind you that sovereignty is not about control, it's about connection, to the self, to meaning, to life itself. When you live this way, you no longer chase peace, you become peace. Toxic people sense it immediately. Their words lose their hooks because there's nothing in you left to grab. You realize that healing through awareness is not an act of escape, but of return. You come home to yourself, to your truth, to your power. And once you've reclaimed that sacred space, something extraordinary begins to happen. The energy around you changes. The people who once drained you lose access. Not because you pushed them away, but because you've risen to a frequency they can no longer reach. And that brings us to the next transformation, the energetic shift itself, that mysterious phase where silence speaks louder than confrontation, and where your healed presence becomes your loudest boundary. There comes a point in every healing journey when words are no longer necessary. The mind grows quiet, the body lighter, and the soul begins to hum with a different frequency. Carl Jung described this as a state of alignment between the conscious and the unconscious mind, when your inner and outer worlds start to mirror one another. This is not a performance, it's an evolution. You no longer need to prove your growth, defend your peace, or explain your silence. The people who once controlled you feel it first. They sense that their usual tactics no longer land. It's like trying to hold smoke with their hands. The energy they once fed on has transmuted into something untouchable. This is the invisible alchemy of transformation. In depth psychology, we call it the completion of a psychic loop, the moment the projection is returned to its rightful owner. You no longer carry their anger, their shame, or their fear. Instead, you become a mirror of clarity, reflecting their own unconscious back to them. It's not revenge, it's resonance. Emotional awareness has turned you into a tuning fork for truth. When someone vibrating in chaos approaches peace, they feel dissonance. They either rise to meet your vibration or retreat to protect their illusion. That's the natural law of energetic polarity, explained not by mysticism but by psychology. What no longer matches your inner state simply falls away. In practical terms, this shift can feel disorienting at first. Old friendships fade, conversations lose their spark, even your own desires begin to change. You might find yourself craving solitude or drawn to new environments, art, nature, books that speak to your expanding consciousness. These aren't coincidences. They are synchronicities explained through the language of the unconscious mind. Jung believed that when we integrate our shadow, life reorganizes itself around our authenticity. What used to drain you now dissolves because your energy no longer negotiates with what's false. This is the spiritual awakening behind every genuine act of healing. The moment you realize you were never meant to be understood by everyone, only aligned with yourself. The world, of course, will notice. Some will call you distant, others mysterious. But those who are ready will recognize the change as peace, not arrogance. Your calm becomes your message. The human psyche, now attuned to both light and darkness, operates from emotional alchemy rather than reaction. You start seeing life symbolically, a storm as purification, silence as wisdom, endings as initiation. Even your dreams shift. Where once there was running in fear, now there are doors opening, light filtering through, perhaps a bird flying into an open sky. These are signs of shadow integration, symbols that the repressed self has found its voice. In relationships, this energy shift feels like gravity reversing. Toxic people lose interest not because you've changed your words, but because you've changed your vibration. They can no longer find themselves in your reflection. The unconscious bond that kept you tethered to their chaos has been dissolved by awareness. The hero's journey has come full circle. You left the familiar, faced your dragons, and returned home with wisdom. You no longer seek to fix others. You embody balance. That's the meaning of individuation, the realization that you are both the light and the shadow, and neither can exist without the other. And as you walk through the world with this calm certainty, something miraculous happens. New people, equally conscious, start to appear. You meet others who speak the same quiet language of awareness. The universe reflects your growth through new synchronicities, opportunities, ideas, connections that feel predestined. This is not magic, it's alignment. The power of the mind, once fragmented by doubt, now moves as one with the soul. And in that harmony, you finally understand. When toxic people lose access to you, it's not a loss, it's liberation. The chapter closes not with noise, but with stillness, as life gently invites you toward your next evolution. So now the question is, how much longer will you let someone else narrate your story? You've already seen what happens when awareness enters the room. Control collapses, guilt evaporates, silence becomes strength. The power of the mind isn't in reacting, it's in choosing. And every time you choose peace over chaos, you're practicing the deepest form of shadow work, integrating your light and darkness until they no longer fight each other. Carl Jung believed that the meaning of life isn't found in perfection, but in wholeness. And wholeness begins the moment you stop trying to fix others and start understanding yourself. That's the real individuation process, the inner alchemy that turns pain into power, wounds into wisdom, and suffering into consciousness. It's the invisible revolution that happens when you realize you were never powerless, just unaware of your own depth. So tell me, who are you when no one else's opinion defines you? Who do you become when you stop apologizing for your light? Maybe that's what life has been trying to show you all along, that freedom was never about escaping people, but about returning to yourself. And once you return, no one can take that peace from you. If this message spoke to you, if something inside you woke up even a little, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and keep walking this path of awareness with us. Because every video here is another step into the unconscious mind, another conversation with your shadow, another invitation to remember who you really are. And that journey, the journey back to yourself, is the most sacred one you'll ever take.